Hi, I'm Samuel Joshua on the etiology of antibiotics. The word etiology in medicines simply means that the cause or origin of disease, or it also refers to the philosophical study of causes. Definition of antibiotics. Antibiotics is from antibiosis, meaning against life. It is a substance that derived from microorganisms to kill or suppress other microorganisms. Classification of antibiotics. Antibiotics are classified based on their mechanism of action, their spectrum of activity, and their mode of action. There are two types of antibiotics. First is the bactericidal, and the other is bacteriostatic. Bactericidal is simply function as engulf or destroy the microorganism, whereas bacteriostatics, its function is it inhibits or stop the growth of microorganisms. Mechanism of actions. First, these antibiotics works by inhibiting the cell wall synthesis of microbial cells. Drugs that does these functions are penicillin, cephalosporins, and vancomycin. Secondly, they inhibit the folic acid synthesis. This is done by sulfonamide. Third, it inhibits the protein synthesis of bacterial cells. Drugs that inhibit the synthesis of proteins are chlorophenicols, microlids, and clindamycins. Four, they inhibit the nucleic acid synthesis. Drugs that inhibit the nucleic acid synthesis of bacterial cells are quinolones and rifampin. Finally, they inhibit the cellular membrane functions in bacterial cells. The drugs that inhibit the function of cellular membranes of microbes are polymyxins. However, over time, when the microbes continually exposed to antibiotics, they develop a defense mechanism over a certain period of time. They develop the antimicrobial resistance. Antimicrobial resistance, even germs like bacteria and fungi develop the ability to defeat the drugs to kill them. Antimicrobial resistance is a natural process that happens over time through genetic changes in microbes or pathogens. Its emergence and spread is accelerated by human activity, mainly the misuse and overuse of antimicrobials to treat, prevent, or control infection in human, animals, and plants. Okay, that's all.
Hi guys, my name is Kemal Maliso and I'm going to talk about epidemiology and the incidence of antibiotics in PNG. As of 2020, the population of PNG is primarily rural, with only 13% living in urban settings. Therefore, most of our populations are living in rural areas. However, our clinics and hospitals back in the rural areas, they do not have the equipment used to identify bacteria, a specific bacteria that is causing specific disease. Therefore, they have been prescribing antibiotics by seeing the symptoms and signs. That is why they have overprescribed antibiotics. Another overuse and misuse of antibiotics due to patient to doctor ratio. Our patient to doctor ratio is 1:17,000. Due to this, they have been introduced a nursing scope so the nurses can also prescribe medicines. However, nurses have took advantage of this one and they have been prescribing medicines. Another overuse of antibiotics is in livestock. Humans need antibiotics to treat diseases or sick, and yet we are wasting unnecessarily on livestock. We are using antibiotics in those livestock. They are able to resist the antibiotic that is being given to the livestock. Therefore, the antibiotic resistant bacteria can also be transferred to human beings while they are eating their meat. Between 1989 and 1992, a prospective analysis of food and CSF from children in Goroka with suspected bacteria found 22% resistance and 74% of oximoxazole resistance, as well as intensity to penicillin and trimethoprim in 23% and 65% of isolates, respectively. There is a record showing that babies and old people are more at risk and they are vulnerable for the antibiotic resistance. We are moving on to the treatment. Vaccines are preventive measures that stimulate the immune system to protect against specific disease, while antibiotics are used to treat bacterial infections. However, overuse and misuse of antibiotics have led to the development of antibiotic resistance, posing a significant global health threat. To combat or treat this issue, research and development of new vaccines and alternative treatments are crucial. So they're still working on it to find out about the problem. It is more better to prevent. I think prevention. Prescription should be done by the doctors because they are the highly qualified to do that. And use of antibiotics only when necessary. And hospitals in rural areas should be equipped with also the equipment that is necessary to find out about the bacteria that is causing the specific disease so that antibiotics can be given to individuals for a specific treatment of a specific disease. Thank you. That's all from me, and thank you for listening.
The distribution of antibiotic abuse and resistance, who is most at risk, treatment and prospects of vaccines. Antibiotic resistance occurs when bacteria develop the ability to defeat the drugs designed to kill them. This problem is intensified by the abuse and overuse of antibiotics, which leads to the development of antibiotic resistance. In Papua New Guinea, where access to healthcare and antibiotic stewardship may be limited, the risk of antibiotic resistance is higher. High-risk groups include patients taking frequent antibiotics, individuals in hospital settings, and those living in crowded or unsanitary conditions. Treatment of antibiotic-resistant infections is challenging and often requires stronger, more expensive medications. Additionally, the development of new antibiotics is slow, making the prospect of effective treatment uncertain. However, there is hope in the development of vaccines that could prevent certain bacterial infections altogether, reducing the need of antibiotics and the risk of resistance. To address this issue, public health interventions, education on proper antibiotic use, and investments in vaccine research are crucial. It is essential to prioritize the responsible use of antibiotics to preserve their effectiveness for future generations.
My name is Eric Karawal, and I will be talking about the impacts of antibiotics on environment, plants, and animals. My friends have already talked about introduce what antibiotic management is, especially antibiotic abuse and its resistance that occur in the body, or antibiotic resistance. They have also highlighted few important points about the etiology, incidence, epidemiology, and distribution of the condition elsewhere in the world, especially in PNG. As for me, I will go straight into highlighting few important points about the impacts of antibiotic abuse on individual, family, and community. Drug-resistant infection impact the health of animals and plants, reduce productivity in farms, and threaten food security. The global rise in antibiotic resistance poses a significant threat, diminishing the efficacy of common antibiotics against widespread bacterial infection. Antibiotic medicines has a significant cost for both health system and national economies overall. For example, it creates need for more expensive and intensive care, affects productivity of patients or the caregivers through prolonged hospital stays, and harms agriculture productivity. Not only Papua New Guinea, but antibiotic is a problem for all countries at all income levels. Its spread does not recognize country borders. People living in low-resource settings and vulnerable population are especially impacted by both the driver and the consequence of antibiotic medicine. The 2022 Global Antimicrobial Resistance and Use Surveillance System, known as GLASS, report highlights alarming resistant rates among prevalent bacterial pathogens. That I've listed below a few impacts of antibiotics on environment. Number one, impacts health of animals and plants. Antibiotic given in farms, especially once given in farms and nursery. 2. Taking antibiotic increases the chance of developing antibiotic resistance bacteria, severe illness, disability, and even death. 3. Antibiotic resistant infection can be easily spread from people or objects that are contaminated. 4. Low resource setting or people in settlement and rural villages are especially impacted. Global rise in antibiotic resistance poses a significant threat. 6. Expensive cost and intensive care. 7. Longer the antibiotic resistant infection lives in the body, it grows smarter and became part of our gene, making it even harder to kill. Lastly, antibiotics that are excreted as urine and feces from humans and animals in farms can contaminate the soil, water, plants, and etc. Also affect the agriculture.
Hello, I am Solomon Hubert. I will briefly explain about the economic impact of antibiotic management, especially how mismanagement of antibiotics affect the economy. One of the indirect ways where mismanaging antibiotics can affect our economy is through antibiotic developing resistance to antibiotics. Bacteria can develop antibacterial resistance through exposure to antibiotics in many ways. And one of the ways can be like people in our communities purchasing amoxicillin from street vendors and using them without proper diagnosis and dosage regimen of the disease that they acquired. Why? It's because the disease that they acquired may or may not be bacterial. Another example is the use of broad-spectrum antibiotics to treat bacterial infections. The bacteria that is causing infection may be susceptible to the potent broad-spectrum antibiotic, but it may not be potent to other bacteria. So those bacteria that are not susceptible to the antibiotic can develop resistance. Now, the development of resistance will increase the cost of treating that strain of resistant bacteria because of one, longer duration of sickness and prolonged hospital stay, where a lot of antibiotics and associated medicines will be consumed and will demand more. 2. Additional laboratory and diagnostic procedures. A lot of laboratory equipment and resources will be used to test for the same strain of bacteria again and again, which is just waste of laboratory resources and money. And 3. Government, hospitals, and other relevant health authorities may choose to purchase potent but expensive antibiotics to suppress the resistant bacteria. In addition to that, the current situation in our country or the economic imbalance in our country, we can see that through the prices of food and fuel hiking. This situation can lead to the delay in supply and unavailability of antibiotics to patients, which can then lead to patients dying from bacterial infections. This can result in gender inequality in our society, and most importantly, the skilled human capital of our country will reduce, where they can survive with the availability of antibiotics and work and contribute to the economy of our country. Thank you, and that's all from me.